Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and today we are going to do a show on John Sykes and Blue Murder. I've got a panel of guests today. I've got Tim Durling from Tim's Vinyl Confessions. There you go. I've got the bookmark. Steve Deluxe from Rock and Metal Invasion, and Reed Little from the Contrarians. Hello, gents.
Hi. Afternoon, Peter. Great to be here.
So what we're going to do is we're going to do a deep dive on Blue Murder's debut album, first impressions, and then we'll do song by song what we like, what we don't like. We'll have a bit of a chat about the album and why it may not have been commercially successful, and then we'll touch upon the follow-up Blue Murder album. So maybe I'll throw it to you, Tim. What was your very first impression of the Blue Murder album?
So this was an album and a band that I was actually watching for. So just a real quick history. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with Tigers of Pantang. And I know John Sykes was on, I think, their first 2, maybe 3 albums. Really not sure about that. Then he joined Thin Lizzy for this, I think, a great album, Thunder and Lightning in 1983. Absolutely. I see Steve's got Tigers of Pantang stuff there. You thought, what a cool album cover that is. 5 years before Kiss, they had an album called Crazy Nights. And then, of course, he joins Whitesnake, especially for this album, which Peter and I discuss in depth in an upcoming episode. But so John Sykes splits from Whitesnake, a lot of animosity, a lot of bad feelings. He retains a deal with Geffen Records because John Clodner, the famous A&R guy, realizes that there's talent, there's songwriting, and we can make a star out of this guy, or he figures they can. So they drop a lot of money, and the end result, he joins up with Carmine Appice, legendary drummer, and Tony Franklin, fretless bass player, fresh from the firm. This cassette I purchased in the summer of 1989, and I played it endlessly in my Walkman. I loved it from the get-go. I did actually see the video to Valley of the Kings, probably about a month or so prior to the album coming out, and that hooked me right in. I played it all the time. I know it inside out, and I've been playing it a lot more, preparing for, I've actually been on 2 or 3 different shows talking about Blue Murder, so I've listened to this album a lot. That's the CD version. I found this in a cutout a few years back. It's actually got the hype sticker on it. And I don't know how well this will show up, but it's actually a stamped promotional copy.
Yeah, I can sort of see the gold, but
it's a stamped promotional copy.
Yeah.
So that tells me that, that's a sign of an album that was over, I don't want to say overhyped, but was predicted to be a bigger success than it was. Unfortunately, I'm just going to guess it probably sold in its initial life 350, 400,000 copies. It sold probably respectfully, but it didn't go gold. There were no hit singles off of it. That's one of the things I think the album lacked, was a hit single. Radio pushed the song Jelly Roll. That was not the hit single. It didn't have a Here I Go Again. It didn't have a knockout, can't miss, radio can't resist hit single, and that's what this album needed. If it had been a 10 song album with that definite can't miss, it came out in the summer, it could have been like a summertime hit. Then they could have followed it up with Jelly Roll. Then maybe they could have followed it up with Out of Love, and it would have sold maybe not in the realm as the 1987 Whitesnake album, 8-9 million, but it might have gone platinum, maybe triple platinum, double platinum, and Blue Murder might have had a career. As it turns out, it kind of fizzled and things got complicated. I think so. One of the reasons was it lacked a bona fide hit single. Now, I'm not saying it lacked good songs. Don't get me wrong, but it didn't have the pop factor. But it also really wasn't metal either. It was like an album full of the deeper tracks on the 1987 album. They made a big deal about it being a power trio, but tons of multi-track guitars, one guitar player, lots of tracks of guitars, lots of keyboards, lots of background vocals. So it was produced much the same way. The approach that went into the Whitesnake album, it was actually one of the first production jobs by Bob Rock, after Bob Rock wasn't Bruce Fairbairn's engineer anymore. So produced by Bob Rock, mixed by Mike Fraser. It's got the huge drum sound. But the other thing I think that they lacked was strong management. Their management was something like John Sykes' father-in-law or something like that. They didn't have the high-powered management to get in the faces of MTV and radio programmers. They didn't land on a big tour. They did a little bit of touring, but it was like months down the road. And it was like, but those are my impressions of the album. Overall, I think it's a fantastic album. It's a treasure for the few. The people that know the album tend to like it a lot, but a lot of people, it just went by. It just went by them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for that. Reed, what was your first impressions of the album in the day?
Well, in many ways similar to Tim's, I think that the video for Valley of the Kings was the first thing that I saw, and then I got the album, loved it from day one. So to add just a little bit of contemporary historical context, 1989 had two of my favorite bizarrely similar Guitar Hero stories, with Jake E. Lee from Ozzy Osbourne and then John Sykes from Whitesnake. So Sykes gets kicked out of Whitesnake. He puts together Blue Murder, and the early incarnation of Blue Murder includes singer Ray Gillen. Ray Gillen doesn't work out with Blue Murder, but he goes and he hooks up with Jake E. Lee, who's just been kicked out of Ozzy Osbourne. And then Jake and John put out albums within 2 weeks of each other. And of course, that's the first Badlands and Blue Murder. And both of those albums, I think, are minor masterpieces. So I loved 1989. And those were two of my favorite albums from that time. And it's such obviously what it is. It's Thin Lizzy plus Whitesnake, plus most people will say Led Zeppelin, and it probably really is Led Zeppelin, but to me, it's Black Sabbath. And we'll talk more about the Black Sabbath connection because Tony Martin co-wrote songs on this album. This is after Tony was on Eternal Idol with Black Sabbath. And I'll get a little bit more into what I think is Sabbathy on the album, but I think Bob Rock's production is amazing. If you put it up track by track next to the 1987 album, and Mike Stone and Keith Olsen, those were big names. But the album that they produced is muddy and hard to listen to. There's so much harmonizer on the guitars. There's so much reverb on the guitars. You can't even really hear Sykes's solo in Still of the Night. It's just drowned by this wash of reverb. His guitar sound is so much clearer on Blue Murder, even though he's got 10, 11, 12 tracks of guitars going at the same time. So Bob Rock was amazing.
It's how they were recorded. Or it's how they were mixed. And and it turns out he's a fine vocalist. Ironically, for a band that fired both Ray Gillen and Tony Martin, he's very similar to Ray Gillen and Tony Martin. So I don't know why the other guys didn't work, but yeah, great hard rocking, some terrible lyrics, but some fantastic riffs and blazing solos. I loved it.
Well done. Thank you, Reed. Steve, what was your first impressions of this album?
Well, basically in 1989, I'm just trying to, pick up, any sort of hard rock metal release that, they've got big hair and you know what I mean? They're being hyped up in the magazines. And so my knowledge of John Sykes and what he's done in the past at that time is actually pretty limited. So I think I pretty much picked up Blue Murder. I got it on cassette, actually. I don't have it anymore. But like Tim, I had it on cassette. And I did know that he was in Whitesnake. I couldn't quite understand why they'd got rid of him because I know that I thought, so David Coverdale wants his band to look better, look prettier. But I thought, what's wrong with Sykes? He's a pretty good looking guy. Why they got rid of him? Anyway.
He's not too shabby, is he?
Yeah, so I thought he would have
probably a little too much in that department for
yeah, maybe
liking.
he's taken it away from David a little bit. Exactly, yeah. So I understood some of the other Whitesnake guys perhaps weren't pin-up models or anything, but I thought, Sykes, he's all right. But anyway, obviously there was some disagreements there, and yeah. Anyway, however, I knew that he was in the band, and I knew that he'd had a hand in the songwriting on the 1987 album. I hadn't actually checked out Whitesnake prior to the 1987 album at that point. So, and I'd heard he was in Thin Lizzy and Tigers of Pantang, but those bands at that stage I wasn't very familiar with them. So it was kind of it really was like a new band for me when I checked it out. Yeah, like I said, had it on cassette, and yeah, the first thing I noticed was, the production. I thought, this sounds amazing. The way it kicks off, I know we're going to do a track by track in a second, but just, my initial thoughts when I hear that first song, that, it's quite the way it builds very slowly, and then it really kicks in, and you hear the drums and the guitars. Thought this is going to be a killer album. What I did though notice that it's a bit up and down, for me anyway, as it went through the albums. That was a good song. I don't about this song so much. So I mean, we're going to go through it when we go through the tracks, but
we'll cover that in more detail.
Yeah, for me, there's some standout tracks, and then there's also some that are a bit. Yeah, I think it is interesting when you compare it to the Badlands situation. There's so many similarities, and they're both really good albums. For me, Badlands is such a great album. Their debut Badlands, and even the fact that Badlands in a way only really put out 2 albums as well as Blue Murder. There was issues, within the band and so forth. But yeah, I think it's a solid album. Again, we talked about the fact that it probably just didn't have the hit single, and maybe the songs they did choose as the singles weren't the right choices. Yeah, and also here I've heard Reed and Tim talk about seeing the music videos. I don't know, here in New Zealand we just didn't get the music videos, unfortunately. That we didn't have Headbangers Ball or MTV, so I never saw any of the music videos. I was totally, back in those days, I was just buying. That was all pretty much blind buys, just going on, what the band looks like, and the information I've read in magazines. So that was totally my knowledge before I buy something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So right. Was it the pirate shirts that sold you on the album then?
Yeah. Actually, the thing too,
puffy shirt.
Yeah, and also though, I was like a 3-piece too. That was a bit unusual as well. So I was like, they've only got 3 people in their band, So that was a little bit different, but yeah.
All right, thanks. For me, it's good to talk about an album that I lived through. So I lived through the Whitesnake story. I lived through 1987. I followed the soap opera saga. With Blue Murder, the first time I knew that this band was put together was in a magazine in Australia called Juke Magazine. It's one of those weekly sort of music magazines that I picked up, and they did a review on Blue Murder. And I thought, wow, I've got to get this. John Sykes, Tony Franklin, and Carmen Appice. Wow, that's right up my wheelhouse. And I went to the record store, bought the CD. So this is like a first original CD. And Tim, for you, there's the CD, like on the original Geffen.
Mine, I think mine looks much the same, just with the different address change on it. I think Geffen were pretty uniform throughout the world.
Absolutely. Played it to death and loved it because every song's got hooks on it. There's all these, whether it's a keyboard hook, whether it's a guitar hook, and Sykes playing all the way through is just phonetic. It's a very busy album, and we'll talk more about it. But just to recapitulate what Reed was saying, I can put it down to the essence. It's got Thin Lizzy, Led Zeppelin, Whitesnake for me, and I know, Reed, you'll talk about Black Sabbath and all those elements, and it's just completely amped up, and I loved it. Over the years, I've sort of been in love with it and then grown out of love with it. But, just listening to it recently, I've sort of reassessed my views. You'll hear it as we go song by song. So, Tim, why don't we start and talk about the first song on the album, Riot? What do you think of this track?
Well, this, it's a perfect way to kick off an album. It's got the atmospheric keyboards in the beginning of it. It's got a huge drum fill by Carmine, and we're off to the races. And, even if I hadn't seen the video for Valley of the Kings, which, by the way, I didn't see a lot. I happened to catch it on a videotape that one time that Much Music played it. And the only time I ever saw Jelly Roll in its entirety was years later on YouTube. So they weren't a popular video played band. But I didn't realize at the time I liked the song right away. But later on, when I started getting into more 70s bands, and then I started to get into Thin Lizzy, I thought, holy cow, this is basically John Sykes rewriting Jailbreak lyrically. Like, this is basically the same story. You know, there's going to be a riot, there's going to be a jailbreak tonight. Like, and, you know, I thought that was kind of cool. And yes, it is a busy album. I never thought of that before, but it is very, very busy. But there's all these kinds of, like Peter said, hooks. After the first time, you know, when the vocal first comes in, there's been a riot down on Main Street tonight. You've got the pinch harmonic, the squeal on the guitar, left channel, right channel, left channel, like just, and there's all sorts of stuff like that throughout the album. Just cool little tricks. Great harmonies. Sykes is a fine singer, great singer. Now, perhaps another knock on the band was the fact that there was no dedicated frontman out front with the mic stand. There was no David Coverdale or Vince Neil or Steven Tyler, but Sykes is a fine singer, you know? And yes, the guitar is produced so much better on this album than on the 1987 album. It's just as layered and busy, but Reed's absolutely right. It's there's a focus to it, and your ears don't get as fatigued. The drums are better sounding, and that's no slight on Keith Olsen or Mike Stone, because both very established producers, both sadly no longer with us, but it's almost like the two producers were fighting, because I know they produced different mixes at different times, and the end result was what we hear. But I think Bob Rock's production, I'm a big fan of that Bob Rock, Bruce Fairbairn production anyway. And to me, this is you know, aliens came to Earth and wanted an example of what a Bob Rock produced album sounded like. I don't think I'd give him Dr. Feelgood or the Black Album. I'd give them this one and say, check this one out. So Riot, great opening track. It's heavy, but it's melodic. It's, you know, it's got dynamics. There's a breakdown in the middle of it. The soloing is amazing. There's so much soloing at the end. I love Carmine's work with the ride cymbal in different parts of the song. Yeah, like I'm just ready to hear the rest of it at this point.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tim. Reed.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with all of that. It's such a good opener. I think as we go through track by track, you can really simply segregate this album into, this is a Whitesnake song, this is a Thin Lizzy song, this is a Led Zeppelin song, or for me, Black Sabbath. I know most of you are going to disagree with that, but I'm going to hold that opinion, Doug, on it. This actually is a crossover track that could have been either Whitesnake or Thin Lizzy. It is very Thin Lizzy-esque, especially in the vocals. I think that, as you know, I don't think either Phil Lynott or David Coverdale taught John Sykes to write lyrics, but he learned about music by being in those bands. And I think he picked up the lessons better from Phil Lynott than he did from David Coverdale. And in general, I like the Thin Lizzy-esque songs on the album better than the Whitesnake-esque songs. The other thing is it comes right in with that fretless bass sound. And even now, fretless bass is a very strange accent in rock music. And it makes it stand out completely from his peers that were playing fretted instruments. So that's a very interesting choice. And I would not have necessarily thought it would work, because the thing that characterizes a fretless bass is the lack of attack on a note. It has a very soft attack. So when you combine that with a guy who's playing notes at, 12 to 16 notes per second over this really soft, warbly bass, you wouldn't think it would work, but it does. And again, I put that down to Bob Rock, because that had to have been very difficult to engineer. But it gives your ear something to go, hey, this isn't just, 1987, the Whitesnake album. I know a lot of people refer to it as 1987 with a different singer. It's got a completely different sound. And the lyric isn't bad, unlike some stuff we'll see soon. So
Yeah. All right, Steve.
Yeah, I just think it's a great start to the album. As I said before, it starts off quite atmospherically, and Reed's mentioned the fretless bass as part of in that intro as well. The keyboards and the drums and guitars just kick in, and it's a great rocker. Tim also mentioned little squeals, this little guitar, little stabs that happen throughout it, which I think sound really good. I like the I like the pre-chorus more than the chorus. So he's going something like whiskey to water, water to wine, something like that. And I like that part more than the actual chorus. I think the chorus of There's Going to Be a Riot is a little bit repetitive at times, but I really like that part of the song. Great production. I think you hear that song, you think, wow, this album is really well produced. Everything sounds amazing. Great song. Really love it.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think it's a cracker of our opener. I think it's on steroids, the production. It is widescreen. You've got the opening keyboards, which I think are played by Nick Green, very John Lord-like, and that fretless bass sounds beautiful. Interesting point, Reed, about the fretless bass. Fretless bass, you hear a lot in bands that are like soul or R&B. You wouldn't hear it in the heavy metal wheelhouse. And Tony Franklin has done work with, say, Kate Bush. Quieter songs, very effective. But hearing a fretless bass played in a hard rock environment is quite unusual. And the first time I heard Tony Franklin was on The Firm. Remember that supergroup? Yeah. And just hearing that bass, that twanging and that really unusual tone was the first time, Tony's bass playing sort of picked my ear. But I think it's a great opening track. It's got a very Lizzy sort of lyrics, as you've said, Tim. And I think it's a fine opening track. All right, let's go to the second one, Sex Child. Tim.
Just one more quick note about Riot. It's funny that Steve mentioned the chorus. I've got the lyric sheet from the vinyl here in front of me. It considers the whiskey to water, water to wine, the chorus. So, yeah. But it doesn't, if that's the case, then there really is no bridge. But you're right, that is a stronger melodic hook.
You notice with Blue Murder, they often don't have typical song structure, so they won't necessarily go verse, chorus. They might go verse and they have like what you think's the chorus, but it's really not the main chorus, and they might go back to a verse again, and then the actual chorus thing comes in later on in the song, right? So, and I quite like that. It's kind of it's not typical, but which is why sometimes what you thought was the chorus that maybe wasn't the main chorus.
Yeah,
actually can
so it's
sound
like
better.
The part where they say there's been a riot. That's almost just the riff again with a little bit of vocal over it. But you're right. If that was considered the chorus, it's not much of a chorus. And that sabotages many a great song. But let's move on. Yeah. Okay. So the thing that people need to remember about Sex Child is that John Sykes wrote these lyrics as a jab at David Coverdale. They were never meant to be taken seriously. He totally wrote them in the style of David Coverdale's lyrics. Now, I love Whitesnake, and Peter and I have discussed this, and we've got an episode of Whitesnake coming up. But I say this semi-jokingly, and I say this as a fan, and he's one of my favorite singers ever. I've seen him in concert. He's one of my favorite frontmen. David's essentially written 2 or 3 sets of lyrics in his life. He's written the sex lyric, he's written the love lyric, and then he's written like the Soldier of Fortune type of lyric. And he just basically mines from those 3. That's just my opinion. This is definitely John Sykes making fun of the way that Coverdale would write a song like, say, Spit It Out or Slide It In. It's so completely over the top that the first time I listened to it, I actually laughed out loud in the mid part of the song with what he says. I'm like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Musically, though, it could totally have been a Whitesnake song. It could totally have been a Whitesnake song as is if you just added in Coverdale's lyrics and maybe toned down some of the lyrics. Like the lyrics almost tilt that wheel or tilt that scale over to Spinal Tap, or nowadays we'd say Steel Panther territory, where they're just so over the top.
Bad Motley Crue.
Yeah, exactly. But that was the intention. I don't think it was ever meant to be taken seriously as a song. Of course, you read that in the press in 1989, someone picking up this album and listening to it in 2023 without any prior knowledge of that is kind of like, this guy's a pig. But, context is everything. Musically, yeah, it's even musically, it's kind of Sykes making fun of himself because it's got that Still of the Night type of breakdown in the middle of it. But again, blazing guitar, great background vocals. Whoever's doing the background vocals, they're probably listed. They're probably the same crew that usually provides those gang vocals whenever an album was recorded in Vancouver. There's a group of those guys. You'll see them on Motley Crue and Bon Jovi and all those albums that get recorded there. I think it's a good song. The lyric in and of itself is cringy. It's easier to take when you know the story that it was written as a slight satire, but not by much. Like, it's almost okay. It's just that little bit more. And I think that's the jab at Coverdale, because there's, for whatever reason, such animosity between those two. And even in the case where most bands reconcile over the years, those two never did, and I don't think they ever will. But
yeah. Hey, can I ask you a question, Tim? Did he say that in an interview, that it was a satire, it was written as a satire or a dig at Coverdale? Has he actually on record? He did say that.
I don't have it. I remember reading it in either Circus or Hit Parader, and I believe the quote that said was a jab at Coverdale, who likes to, quote unquote, beat around the bush with his lyrics. That's the way he put it. So that's where I'm basing that off of. Is it researchable? I don't know. Yeah. I guess you'll have to take my word for it. But that always stuck in my mind, because after reading that, I heard the album first, and then I read that and I go, oh, okay.
Rightio. Okay, thanks for that. Reed.
All right. Well, to me, this is the worst song on the album. And it's because of the lyrics. And I'm going to say that I am willing to take everything that Tim just said as being true. Can't verify it. I'm going to make claims later we can't verify. But it matters exactly not at all to me. Those are stupid lyrics.
They still committed it to the album. I know.
Yes, it's just like, just because somebody means something is a joke, that doesn't make it funny or acceptable. Those lyrics were stupid in 1989, and they're much stupider now. And yet the song is such a good song. Now, it is a bit, parody is the wrong word, but it's not necessarily the wrong intent, because it is a good song. It's not like, when I can't remember, Ollie Halsall wrote the lyric for Meet the Ruddles. Am I getting way into the weeds here? Anyway, he was spoofing the Beatles, right? John is not spoofing Whitesnake. He is writing a song in the exact same manner that he wrote on the 1987 album, but it's still a fantastic set of tracks. The guitar is amazing. Carmine, a piece, and it cracks me up that Carmine insists on being called a piece, and his brother Vinny insists on being called Apathy. Yeah.
Well,
I know the story behind that.
I did say Apathy, didn't I?
I get mixed up which one is which, and it's like, what does your mom call you?
Yeah, Carmi probably, but it's not good. But like I said, the music is so good that it makes you wish. However, if he meant it as a jab, he should have been a slightly less petty person. And it can't have been easy. I read that it took him 5 weeks to do this one song. It was, he said, the hardest song on the album. And maybe that was an indication that he should have just gone a different way. But he didn't. It is what it is. Again, to me, it's the worst song on the album. Which, if you're a person that doesn't like or doesn't care about lyrics, and I know that there are millions of people that don't care about lyrics, it's a great song.
Yeah. Gee whiz, 5 weeks. The struggle is real. Wow.
It's weird because musically that doesn't sound like one of the more complicated pieces on, but I could be wrong.
Oh dear. Steve.
Yeah, well, for me, I just think it's a B-side. I think the fact that he's written it as a bit of a having a go at David Coverdale, then that's a perfect B-side. You know, like you want to put it out there, but don't inflict it on the people who are spending their money maybe buying the album. Actually, I don't mind the lyrics. You know, I like hair metal, so you know, it's I'm kind of used to those sort of lyrics with a lot of albums I have in my collection. So I mean, you know, I don't like necessarily think these are the kind of lyrics he should have on his album, because as we'll find out on some of the other songs on this album, he can actually write some good lyrics. So, but it's just actually for me a little bit opposite to you, Reed. I don't mind the lyrics, but I don't actually think it's a good song. I don't think it's a great song. And you mentioned this too, Tim. It copies "Still of the Night" when it has that sort of breakdown and it goes all slow, and then he starts going, "Give you my loving girl," and it's just and then
the echo, yeah.
It's exactly like that part in "Still of the Night." It's exactly like it. And again, maybe that's all part of them, you know, having a go at Coverdale here, but because it's totally copies that part, but it's not anywhere near as good a song. And then after that slow bit, it cranks up again. It does finish with a nice solo. You know, obviously, you know, Sykes can pull off a great solo, and that kind of redeems the song a little bit. But yeah, I don't know why you would put that as track 2 as well. You know, like it's obviously not one of the stronger songs, and you've just had a great opening song, and then it's gone down a little bit with that one. So yeah.
All righty, thank you. Well, I'm wondering if John Colander sort of said we've got to have a "Still of the Night" song on the album, and that was the template. You handed him the piece of paper, and one part Led Zeppelin, because let's face it, guys, it's mining Led Zeppelin. It's a whole lot of love done again. "Still of the Night" to me is a masterpiece, and I know it rips off Led Zeppelin, and that's where it begins and ends for me in regards to Led Zeppelin. I don't know if you guys remember, but around 1989, everyone was going Led Zeppelin crazy. You had Kingdom Come, you had White Lion were doing their Led Zepp. You did, look, there's hundreds of hair metal bands. They were doing the Robert Plant, they were doing the Led Zeppelin, and this is just another song in a long line of artists that were mining the Robert Plant, Jimmy Page riff book. So in regards to the lyrics, it's got more of Don Dre's than a Carry On film. UK viewers, you know what I'm talking about. It's pretty poor. But one thing is a guilty pleasure in this song. The bit where it gets into the Eastern mystical middle bit, and then it goes suddenly into the guitar solo. That's kind of, my adrenaline does get rushed up when I'm listening to that. I like that. That's supercharged. And I sort of wish that he transported that little sequence or that little run into "Still of the Night." It would have made it an even better song. So it's supercharged. Another thing I want to talk about is Carmine's drumming. He is thunderous on this album. It's like John Bonham resurrected. It's the heaviest drum sound I can hear on a album since Creatures of the Night. It's all the way through. He must be having lots of fun. And you just see the video clips of Carmine, and you know, he's got the, you know, twirling the drumsticks, and he's having a ball. He's just, you know, he's just doing the old John Bonham thing. But look, as a song, it's hard to defend this one. It really is. All right, Valley of the Kings, number 3.
Let's not forget that Led Zeppelin opened for Vanilla Fudge on their first tour. So John Bonham's watching Carmine. So is it Carmine doing John Bonham, or is it just John Bonham liked what Carmine was doing, twirling the sticks? And, you know, you could kind of argue either way. Yeah. And Steve brought up an excellent point that I never thought of before. Yes, it should have been a B-side. It absolutely should have been a B-side. And the second track on that album should have been that elusive hit single I was telling you about. But yeah, on the 45 or back then it would have been the cassette single. Oh, hey, a song I've never heard before. Just kind of like, not exactly like, but when Def Leppard covered "Release Me" as a B-side in Hysteria Sessions and had their guitar or their Malvin Mortimer, their like guitar tech sing it, who can't really sing. It's like, oh, it's a B-side. If they'd have put that as the second track on an album, what are you doing, guys? Valley of the Kings. First thing I ever heard. Video version is actually probably a couple minutes shorter than the album version, but it basically edits that just takes away a couple of the repetitive parts. So it wasn't like, it wasn't all that different, but I wasn't familiar with Led Zeppelin at this point. I was 15 or 14 going on 15. And I'd read the Led Zeppelin criticisms of Whitesnake, but all I would ever see, they used to play this old video of them doing Dazed and Confused from the BBC. That's the only thing this seemed to be the only clip of Led Zeppelin I ever saw with Jimmy Page with the violin bow. And back then it just sounded like a racket to me. And I'm like, what are they talking about? Whitesnake's way better. Like, what are they talking about? Sounding like Led Zeppelin. Anyway, I discovered Zeppelin later. So Valley of the Kings, anytime a heavy rock band does like an Eastern motif in a song, people always say, oh, it sounds like Kashmir. But this is heavy. It's drop D. A lot of the songs in this album are drop D, actually. I think Sykes' vocals on it are fantastic. I like the movements it goes through. I like the, Carmine's drum fills, dun, 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 like it's, again, thunderous. Yes, it's so well played, so well produced. I think it was a good decision to make it not the first single. I don't think this actually had a 45 single version, but the first video, and maybe the first thing that went to rock radio. I think it was a good introduction, because you don't want to come out with a ballad at this point, because they wanted to prove themselves as a heavy rock band. And this is something that the really hardcore metal people would have to say, yeah, this is good. Crank this up. And it's accessible enough for anybody that liked that Whitesnake album should have been able to listen to it and go, yeah, I like that. It's, again, hooks. It's got hooks in it. So not a song that was likely to set the top 40 airwaves alight, but a really good first taste of this album. Should have been the second track.
Yep. Reed.
Yep, my second favorite song on the album. And I saw this video a lot. They played it in America on Headbangers Ball for quite a while, in pretty heavy rotation. Maybe not quite a while, but a couple of months at least, because I know it was one of those I watched waiting for that video to come on. I love that song so much. And possibly, people were spending stupid amounts of money in the 1980s. That video is rumored to have cost $150,000 in 1980s money. That was a bunch of money to spend on a video. Yeah. So just crazy stuff. But for me, I'm sorry, no matter how many times you say it's Led Zeppelin, this is a Black Sabbath track. It's co-written by Tony Martin, which is why you have the mystical lyrics. It's not, every other song on this album is about romance, or it's slice of life crime dramas, Whitesnake and Thin Lizzy. This song has this mystical lyric about ancient Egypt. That's Tony Martin's influence. And all I have to do is imagine Tony Iommi playing that guitar riff, and this would have fit perfectly on Eternal Idol. Perfectly on Eternal Idol. You could even still have had John Sykes sing it. It's a Black Sabbath song to me. And now, obviously, John Sykes is in order of magnitude faster than Tony Iommi. But, speed is not everything. Nonetheless, I love this song. I love, what nerd doesn't love ancient Egypt and imagery about ancient Egypt, right? So fantastic song. One of the heaviest songs on the album. Perhaps a bad choice in as much as it didn't necessarily give you an accurate picture of what the rest of the album was going to sound like. Plus the album track is over 7 minutes long, and I know the video was not 7 minutes long because MTV wouldn't play a 7-minute clip.
I bet it's still over 5.
It probably is. It would
have to be to get all the parts in.
Yeah, it's about 6 minutes plus. I was watching it last night. I've been watching it for the last week. Just the show. Yeah.
It is an interesting choice for them to okay a budget for a video for it. You're right.
And if you think about it, well, if people have never looked into the financing of bands, there's no such thing as the record company spent money on it. that goes on the bill of the band, right? The band has to earn that much money back. So that's just debt that Blue Murder is rolling up, and they were simply, they weren't going to be popular enough to pay that kind of tab off. But nonetheless, fantastic song, fantastic. Not just one solo, but multiple solos. And like many tracks, it goes out on a solo. This is an album.
I would love to hear a version where they extend that, because he's everything he's playing. You just want to hear more.
More outro, Tim.
Yeah.
My one complaint about Sykes as a player in general, actually I have more than one. We'll get to that when we get to the maybe why they didn't succeed portion of tonight's show. But my one complaint is he's so frenetic, and the songs where he dials it back a notch, he's better.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I like this song. I don't love it. And it is a long song. It's a little bit plodding, I think, at times. I prefer more up tempo, I think. But yeah, definitely. I was thinking I could imagine hearing this on the Headless Cross, the Black Sabbath album, or Eternal Idol. Yeah, either one of those. And I think for me, it's an okay song, but when it's like 7 minutes long and it's an okay song, it's a bit too long for me. So, but yeah, a good song. I don't know quite why they thought this would be a good one to do a music video for, but as I think maybe we're going to discover on this album, perhaps there just wasn't really a single. There's not that hit single on here, and this is maybe what they thought was the best choice. But yeah.
Okay. I think this is one of my favorite songs on the album, and I'll go a little bit more bolder than you, Mr. Reed Little. I think it's slightly prog. It's sort of touching on the periphery of a little bit of prog. Covers similar sort of topics. You're getting into the Lord of the Rings, the fantasy, the Egypt. It's all in that sort of wheelhouse. The sound is widescreen. It's cinematic. I think the mixing needs a little bit more oomph. And I was playing the Blue Murder, the original CD in my car, Tim. And I know you love the Bob Rock production, but I don't know if you've got any of the later editions where they've sort of cleaned it up. But the original mix on the CD, it's a little bit murky with the definition between the bass and the drums, and that's very prevalent on this song. So that's something that I noticed, and maybe that's a lot of those CDs, because I did buy this in 1989 and playing it on my car stereo.
Issue as far as being a newer one.
Yeah, I don't have that. Yeah, I don't have that. One thing I wrote about this is the bass line of Tony Franklin is like a guitar line. It's like a counterpart to John Sykes. John Sykes is doing all this fireworks type of runs up and down the fretboard. But, Tony Franklin is very important because he's playing like a de facto guitar line on bass. So that's something that needs to be mentioned. Playing by Carmen is just thunderous. He's playing on fire. My favorite part of the song is at 6 minutes and 2 seconds when they go into this chorus and it sounds like Def Leppard. Where they go that la, la, la. I love that. That is my favorite part of the song. And if they had more of that, I'd like the song even better. In fact, that is my favorite part of the whole album. And it's in my head.
Cool.
So anyway, it's Valley of the Kings. Jelly Roll.
Okay, so a little bit of background on Jelly Roll and the video for this. First, I want to do a quick word about Tony Franklin. We've talked about the fretless bass and how unique it sounds. Not only is it unique for 1989, it's unique for a hard rock metal album, especially at this time period where most bass players weren't actually playing bass lines. They were just copying the guitar, or they were just doing eighth note. This key, this and D, do, like, and a bass player like that wouldn't have worked in Blue Murder, where John Sykes is such a busy guitar player. So I think he made a great decision in getting Tony Franklin. And I think it totally set them apart. And it would have been something that set them apart had they had a shot at radio play. So Jelly Roll was supposed to be that shot. And I only saw part of the video back in the day, and I'll tell you where I saw it. Again, I've mentioned Much Music. That's basically Canada's version of MTV. That's our video channel. Started 3 years after MTV did.
Pardon me.
They used to have a show on at the end of the year called Fromage, whatever the year it was. So it would have been Fromage 89. You did not want to have your video seen on one of the Fromage shows because that means they thought it was cheesy. And they thought this video was cheesy for the part where John Sykes drops to his knees in the rain and starts doing that bit there. Not unlike Don Dokken and In My Dreams, which is kind of cheesy too. So they kind of put all their eggs in one basket with this song, and I don't think this was the song to do it. Now, I kind of think it's a cool song. Here's what I wish they would have done. This would have set them apart. It wouldn't have been representative of the album, but I wish they'd have had that sort of acoustic, laid back feel throughout the whole song. Just that like never really go into a heavy electric part, and definitely not going into the power ballad part at the end of the song. It almost sounds like they chopped off the end of one song and chopped off the beginning of another and threw them together, and none too carefully. It's very abrupt sounding, to the point where you're going, wait, what song am I listening to? How did it get into this whole Love Will Break Your Heart thing? This is not the song that I started with. It's a strange title, you know. It never says Jelly Roll in the song, so there's no memorable chorus hook. You know, they could have called it, well, I guess they couldn't have called it I Don't Need No Doctor, but you know what I mean? They could have called it something else. They could have called it She Said or something like that, because they say that over and over again. I think there's a potential there if they'd have maybe just worked on that a little bit more, and then turned that other half of the song into its own song with its own beginning. Maybe you might have had some radio play there, because it actually would have been an early example of an Unplugged song, because Unplugged became the thing. You know, everybody talks about Clapton, but Tesla did it before Clapton, and John Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora did it on the MTV Awards before I think most of those bands in fall of '89. So Blue Murder could have been way ahead of their time to have a song. Whoa, or Extreme or Mr. Big. People would have been like, whoa, there's not even any electric guitar in this song, but it kind of rocks. I kind of like it. It's catchy. Yeah. It would have crossed formats. You know, maybe it would have done what I think this album deserved to do. But as it stands, the song as it is, as it exists, I do like it. I sound like I'm being harsh on it. I do like it. I just think that I think Steve was right. I mean, at a certain point, you can, you know, rave about an album and work really hard on it and be proud of it. You still have to present it to the egg counters at the label, and they've still got to sit around the boardroom and listen to it and go, what are we going to send to radio? What are we going to okay a budget for a video for on this? Absolutely nothing was obvious on this album. And I suppose given everything, this probably was the best shot at it, but I just don't think it had what it took to, you know, to take it over the top. But a fun song. And, you know, it is, you know, it remains what it is. It's Jelly Roll. So
yeah,
that's my 2 cents on that.
Cool, Tim. Before I throw to Reed, just a question for Tim or Reed, because there would have been a lot more copies of this album pressed in America. In the day, did you see a lot of the albums in the wild that may have had the cutout?
Within like 2 years.
Handbacks?
Yeah, within 2 years, I saw the cassette with holes punched through it, which was heartbreaking. I bought it brand new when it came out at full price. But you know, another thing, and I never thought about this before tonight, but maybe people didn't know what this said.
It's a little bit death metal, isn't it?
I think what they should have done is had it multicolored and had a very clear color spelling out Blue Murder and have the rest of it in the background. I think it's cool. It's very ornate. It looks like calligraphy. But, you know, people looking at it, you're right. It's like a bunch of sticks. It's like a death metal logo, or it's like a crest, but you don't know what it says. From afar, like when Steve is on screen with his vinyl in the back, I can read it really well. But you want something that stands out for people and they just know it right away. I think it's a cool cover, but I just wonder if it's not one of those things where maybe there was that little bit of cognitive dissonance where it's like, I kind of heard that song. I don't know who sings it. Maybe I'll see it. And looking on the hype sticker, Jelly Roll. What a silly name. And it could have been the very song they were looking for, So you never know.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things that contribute to this.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll cover
But
that.
yeah, I did see
later.
it. I did see it in the cutouts within 2 years.
Yeah, I thought that. Reed, what do you think of this song, Jelly Roll?
Well, I mean, it is a quite literal song of two halves. So we're clearly in Whitesnake territory on this one. And I have to say, I hated the tendency of bands to do acoustic albums in the late 80s. I freaking hate every one of those albums. I hate 5-Man Acoustic Jam. I hated most of the MTV Unplugged stuff. Just about the only band that ever did an acoustic album I liked was Alice in Chains, I think. Jar of Flies is brilliant. But I like the opening of Jelly Roll. I like it considerably better than the electric back end. And this Martin Popoff has a way of describing songs which I thought was just perfect. He says it's like Meatloaf, right? And this is the back half of Jelly Roll is Meatloaf. He's not just singing Only Love Can Break Your Heart. You can see him singing it to the rain, and he's soloing his butt off in the background, right? Just shredding up a storm. And it's so over the top, which fine, that may be your thing. But I'm like, if I'm going to listen to the solo, I would rather he not be singing over it. And if he's going to sing, I would rather this shrill solo not be going over the top of it, so I can't hear the vocal well. And I had never really thought about just doing an entire song in that kind of Delta blues style. But actually, I think Tim's right. That would have been preferable. But Jelly Roll, I don't know where that came from. I mean, if it's a reference to Jelly Roll Morton, his music didn't sound anything like that. My wife has an entire box set of Jelly Roll that, I'm not a huge Jelly Roll Morton fan, but, I do know what the melody to Fat and Greasy sounds like, and it doesn't sound anything like the song Jelly Roll. So I don't know where that comes from, but it's okay. I mean, I don't skip it. It's so over the top that I can understand why it made Fromage 89.
If you combine the audio with the visual, and you listen to it and you almost picture like, what else could it be but some guy?
Yeah.
But you're right. There's some beautiful guitar. There's some beautiful guitar at the end of that song. And it would have been nice if they'd have just let him play it out. It's not like they're saying anything different. It's just cut that. Like, I'd like to get the multi-track and just cut that rest of those vocals out and just let him play.
He's a guitar playing fool on the whole album. I mean,
yeah.
In the nicest possible way, John.
Yeah.
In the nicest possible way. Steve.
Yeah, I mean, his guitar playing is awesome, but I'll just mention this now because I don't know if I have mentioned it, but he can sing too, eh? Like, he sounds fantastic. His vocals, it's hard to believe he tried like a couple of singers out before he decided, okay, I might as well do it, because he sounds awesome, and in all the songs he sings really good. Jelly Roll, it's a weird title for the song. I like the way it starts off. It's a bit different, and that's kind of cool. And then of course it ends with this sort of it's like almost a different song. Singing "Love Can Break Your Heart," and I wasn't really into that. I remember when I first heard this, and I'm a teenager, and it's not easy for me to go off and buy albums, and I've had to save up money to buy this album, and now I'm thinking, your love can break your heart, but so can buying an album that you don't like and you've spent all your money on as well, And I'm pretty much at this point, when I'm hearing this song, I'm thinking, I don't know if this was a good investment, because for me, the first side, there's only one song that I'm really liking at this point. A couple of the other ones, so-so. But, so for me, it's not a great way to end side one. And like I say, for me, it's only sort of one great song and the other three not so great.
Okay. I think this lyrically does mine the songbook of David Coverdale. I don't need a doctor. I don't need a priest. I mean, that just sounds like David Coverdale, because David Coverdale's got these little catchphrases, and he probably put all these letters together and go, "Oh, that sounds right." That it's so Whitesnake. I love the acoustic, and when it goes into the power ballad, it's a little bit jarring for me. It's been described on social media, and I've read a lot of reviews of what people think of this song, and they say it's two songs. It's like somebody super glued two songs together. The video clip, I watched it. I've seen it before. It is absolutely laughable. It is ridiculous where he drops to his knees and he's got these nice little pecs. He's been going to the gym. No beer guts on this guy. Oh, like that. It's over the top.
Even for 1989, like even in 1989, people were recognizing that it was over the top.
It's just ridiculous. And somebody, the video director, you'd have to have some words with him. We'll talk about this. We'll get to this part about what went wrong. But I think that video clip is a lot to do with what went wrong. But look, I like your idea, Tim. I think it's a big tick from me. If they stuck it to a punchy little acoustic number, it would have been a perfect palette cleanser on the album. And that's what this album needs, palette cleansers, because it's very busy all the way through, light and shade. And this would have been the perfect,
And did you ever notice that the side one of this album is sequenced exactly like the 1987 album, wherein the third track on the album was the heavy song, but the first video that came out, and then you had like the slightly lighter single? I don't think that's a coincidence.
Lightning doesn't strike twice.
No, it's got Kalodner written all over it.
Oh, yeah. I think we should do it this way.
I think there's an episode. We've got to do an episode on Colander.
Yeah. Listen, his name's on a lot of albums in my collection. So
yeah. All right, flip over the album, and in our case, the CD keeps on playing, and we get through to Blue Murder. What do you think of this one, Tim?
Well, like Bad Company, and Night Ranger, and Iron Maiden, they named a song after themselves. It's a catchy song. Really heavy, like bluesy shuffle. I love Carmine's drums, just the drums recorded. I'd almost listen to, how you see on YouTube now, they'll get these isolated tracks. I'd love to hear his just isolated drum track from this album. This, to me, I think this is from the Thin Lizzy school of we're back to Thin Lizzy school of songwriting with, man, it's like he watched a lot of gangster movies or something, or like Jimmy Cagney movies, because he's writing in this mode of, hiding from cops. And if I can just make it to the border, there's a lot of songs like that. And I like it. Great guitar playing. Is this the one where the whole band stops up in the middle of it and he is just shredding for a couple of bars and then they come back in? I can't remember. Maybe it's not this one. I don't know, but it's a great way to open side 2. And it's certainly welcome after the diversion that was Jelly Roll. It's like, okay, they're heavy again. And when these guys were heavy, they were really, really heavy. So, no problems with this track whatsoever for me.
Yeah, good stuff. Reed.
Yeah, definitely back in Thin Lizzy. I mean, more so even than the music of Thin Lizzy, Phil Lynott or Lynott. I think it's.
I've never been sure how to say it. Actually, I've heard it both ways.
He was known for his slice of life lyrics, and even though these lyrics are clearly fictional, you've got a narration of a story, and that is much more the Thin Lizzy wheelhouse than the Whitesnake wheelhouse. So yeah, it's heavier than hell. Sykes actually described it as heavy funk, and I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with Mr. Sykes.
There's nothing funky about this.
Yeah, there may be a little bit of a shuffle to it, but their music's about as far from funk as you can get. However, that did make me think I would love to hear a version of this song with Glenn Hughes singing it. Glenn Hughes would have been a killer vocalist for Blue Murder.
Yeah. He was in the mix, my friend. Glenn Hughes.
I bet you if he'd have been in better health, he probably would have made it.
Yes, he was considered for the band.
But would he have been the bass player as well? Because I don't think his bass style would have worked as well.
Yeah, well, he might actually have had a heavy funk album at that point. But Beyond that, yeah, I love this. I think side 2 is pretty solid. We'll go through that, I'm sure, as we go. But yeah, I think it's a great opener to side 2. I actually like the story. No one else was doing police, gangster movie songs in hard rock. So I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, we're back on track now. This is a great way to kick off side 2. And I just remember thinking, yes, this is the kind of songs I want to hear Blue Murder do. So yeah, definitely, the Thin Lizzy influence is there. The lyrics are so much better. I like the part he's saying, they're screaming blue murder, I'm scheming to survive. That part is really good. It's upbeat, good tempo. I just think it's a really great way to start off side 2. Maybe that's where they got the name for the band. Maybe they wrote the song and thought maybe we'll call our band that. I'm not sure, but
I don't know that. I never thought about that.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know, or maybe that's just a coincidence or something. I'm not sure, but great way to start off the album. Yeah. The side 2 of the album. Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I agree with all of you lads. I think this is a great opening track to side 2, and to me, this shows the possibility of what this band could have been. I think this has got their personality in spades on this one track. They are not following the Whitesnake. They're not following the Led Zeppelin. They're not overtly doing the Thin Lizzy, even though the lyrical themes are very sort of a narrative. But sonically, this is what John Sykes, I think, may have had in his head that he would have liked Blue Murder to be. So out of all the songs, I think this is the most original song because it encapsulates the sound of the possibility of what Blue Murder could have been. Slightly disagree with you, Reed. I think it's got a little bit of funk. There's a little bit of funk in the bottom end. It's not overt, but there is a bit of a funk to it. And John's playing, there's shredding scales. He's just going wild on this one. And I've seen this live. There's a few live clips on YouTube. Wow, as a 3-piece, they were tight as. They had a bigger sound and were so adventurous. And it's amazing when there's so many great 3-pieces in rock history. And I think it's because they've, traditionally a rock band is 4. When you've got to go to 3, they have to go to that extra effort. And those 3 guys are in perfect synergy, and it really comes out in spades on this particular track. All right. Next one is back to power ballad City, Out of Love. Out
of Love, I think this song could have been the second single or the second or third single. If they'd have had a big single to come out with, because what did record companies do? It was either the second or third single was the power ballad. Well, this is it. This is straight out of the Whitesnake, 1987. It's got shades of Is This Love? It's got shades of Looking for Love, which wasn't on the original North American version of 1987, but appeared in the greatest hits. It's totally out of that. I could totally hear David Coverdale singing this. Great guitar playing. It's not a knock on the song, but I just find it strange because it's such a unique lyric. When it goes on, we rode the storm. That always makes me think of Foolin' by Def Leppard. That's not a common lyric. So I'm guessing it was subconscious that it just made it in there. I don't think it was a tribute or anything, but it's kind of weird to me. It's like, that's such a unique turn of phrase. Where else would he have heard it? But a good song. It's long. It definitely would have had to have been chopped down for radio play. And it's funny, when I was a kid, I always hated the idea of radio edits, but as I got older, I got into radio. I understand now, like, you've got so many spots for songs and we'd like to play them, but there's no way we can get away with playing a 6-minute song, or at least all that much. But yeah, this could have been a single, and it could have been a hit single for them. I don't think there's anything about this that's wouldn't appeal to anyone who liked the singles from the Whitesnake album. So, like I said, if they'd have had a bigger hit right off the bat, this would have been an excellent follow-up with a better video, I might add, with a better video than Jelly Roll.
Yeah, I'm still traumatized by that.
Yeah. Use the set from the Valley of the Kings video. Just use the set.
So, save some money. Reduce
Paid
the
for
debt.
the set. Use it.
Reduce their debt. Read.
Yeah, I have often thought that they should have flipped side 2 and side 1 and opened the album with Blue Murder. It's just as good of an opener as Riot. And then you could have released Blue Murder as the heavy song, and then Out of Love Again, or Out of Love as the follow-up power ballad, and they would have been right in the formula. Now, that doesn't mean that it would have been successful necessarily. You know, people's tastes are weird. You can't predict these things. Hindsight's 2020, blah, blah, blah. But it would have been much more in keeping with the way things were done at the time. And Valley of the Kings just continues to be such a weird choice for a song to release. As much as I love it, it's Blue Murder is much more about what Blue Murder is about, with the exception of one song that we still have yet to discuss. But generally, you can't get more power ballad than this song. It is exactly Whitesnake 1987, just with better production. I don't know what to say about it other than that. If you like power ballads, it's got everything you love. And if you don't like power ballads, hit the skip button and go to the next track.
Well,
that's a good point, Reed. Plus, if they'd have come out with Blue Murder first, you would have had a talking point in the media, a song named after the band.
Right.
Like Big Country.
Iron Maiden by Iron Maiden.
Yeah.
They
would have had, you're right. They would have had a fairer shot.
Yeah. It's a very English term, Blue Murder. You're getting away with Blue Murder. I don't know if that's a well-known term in the US or Canada.
I've read it in comics. I'd heard it before. Yeah.
Antique. It's an old like 1930s style term.
Yeah.
Not modern.
Blue Murder or Bloody Murder.
Yeah. Blue Murder, is that an expression in New Zealand that they use from time to time, Steve?
Not common, but I mean, I've heard of it, but it's not something that people go around saying very much. So
yeah, it's an Australian term. We've used that quite regularly. He gets away with Blue Murder. Yeah. Anyway. What do you think of this track, Out of Love?
Yeah, well, every album back in the 80s, especially from the mid 80s onwards, once they worked out bands were going to have hits, pretty much had to have at least one ballad on their album, didn't they? So hard rock, heavy metal bands, or hard rock bands anyway, they had to have a ballad on there. So, and in a way, this is the only one true ballad on the album. So, I kind of can accept that. For me, ballads can be a bit hit and miss. Often, usually a miss. I'm more into the heavier stuff. It's okay. It does sound a little bit like some of the ballads off the Whitesnake album. And now I'm thinking about it, I do sort of wonder why this wasn't released as a single. As much as I don't particularly like it, Is This Love was a huge hit, and it's not that far removed from that song. So maybe that would have been at least a way to have promoted the band a little bit more, because often the thing with the ballad was it got people to know about the band, and then, they'd discover all the other actually good songs, you know what I mean? So, maybe that would have, like we've already sort of discussed, perhaps this would have been a good choice as a single. But
yeah, I'm sort of thinking that maybe they had a dartboard with songs and they're just throwing it and, that's our first single. Like a power ballad in metal in the 80s was made to be a single, and they don't bloody well release this song.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. I don't think it's a very good song. I think it's overwrought, and I like Is This Love. I know I'm probably contrarian. It was originally written for Tina Turner.
Yeah.
And I think David Coverdale, when he was like really skint and he was starting to doing songwriting for other artists, Sykes heard it. I think it's the story. I think a record company got wind of it and said, we're going to use that song. And it became a huge hit. And it's got a hook. It's got soul to it. And I like Is This Love. But this song, it's got no hook.
No, and I'm comparing it to that, Peter, but it's not as good a song. It's not as good. And I think maybe that's why it wasn't. That's the only reason I can think it wasn't released, because they thought actually, it's a ballad, but it's not a hit ballad. It's
not very good.
Yeah, it's just not that great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Either that or it was going to be released. And when, Jelly Roll flopped as a single,
Money ran
Kevin
out.
just pulled the plug on all promotion. So maybe it was earmarked to be a single. You'd never know.
Yeah. Head scratch. All right. Billy. Tim.
And just like that, we're back in Thin Lizzy territory. Like, wow. Wow. This could have been on Thunder and Lightning, This sounds like Cold Sweat or the title song, get into a fight, kill somebody, gets out of hand. Now he's on the run. Like, where have I heard that before? But I like it. I really like it. There's only one thing about the song, and I get hung up on it, and it's a minor thing to get hung up on, but the way that he sings the word public, he always sings public. Like it's got 2 B's in it. They call him Public Enemy number 1. Like, I know it probably sings easier, but but no, I like the song. I really like the song. I love jigga 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 jigga. Like I love the riff in it, and it's great. It's fantastic. Like there's not much to analyze on this one. It's just a great song.
Cool. Reed.
Yeah, according to the internet, it's based on a 1949 film, the name of which escapes me. But it doesn't really matter because the storyline, as crime dramas go, it's about as generic as you get, which is why it makes such a good slice of life lyric. And I agree, it's the most Thin Lizzy-esque of the Thin Lizzy-esque tracks on the album. It's solid, it's enjoyable. He maybe should have decided that was the wheelhouse for Blue Murder, and just stayed in that Thin Lizzy zone. But I suspect with 8 million albums sold that Kolodner and Geffen were pointing.
There would have been so much pressure.
You need to be a little more Whitesnakey.
Yeah.
But
I don't hear a single on this.
Kolodner really he's a funky dude. But I like the track, and I happen to like slice of life crime stories. I may even have seen the movie. But
all right. Cool. Steve.
Yeah, I think definitely very Thin Lizzy-ish. I just wish he had stuck more with these type of lyrics in his songs. I think lyrically this is much more interesting, better. I like the song. I don't love it. Like we've been saying, some of the songs are Whitesnake inspired. They feel like they could be on the 1987. Others, they could have been on Thunder and Lightning. And so there's that inconsistency, which is a bit sort of jarring at times when you're listening to the album. And I'm not really sure if he should have made a Whitesnake album or he should have made a Thin Lizzy album, because I like some of the Whitesnake songs on here and I like some of the Thin Lizzy songs. So it's a bit of a tricky one. It's not really necessarily that I like all the Whitesnake ones and don't like the Thin Lizzy or the other way around. So it's difficult in that sense. There's songs I like and songs I don't like so much, and they're neither Thin Lizzy or Whitesnake ones. So, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to be a little bit bold here. I think John Sykes' heart's always been in Thin Lizzy. I think Whitesnake, his heart has been in commerce, but emotionally, his heart's always been in Thin Lizzy. And that's why I think the Thin Lizzy-oriented songs on this album work much better than the Whitesnake songs. Because the story, when Sykes came over to Whitesnake, he didn't want to join Whitesnake, but they were throwing more money. DC was throwing more money. And the story goes that Sykes went to Leonard and said, well, what do I do? And Leonard said, join the band. It's an offer you can't refuse. So I've always had it with John Sykes that I think his decision with Whitesnake has been very commerce orientated. But emotionally and lyrically and soulfully, I think his heart's always been in Thin Lizzy. And when he plays in that Thin Lizzy wheelhouse, it's much more convincing. And this is probably why this is one of the best songs on the album, because it sounds like Thin Lizzy, that, Thunder and Lightning.
If you check out some of his solo albums that he put out in the late 90s, he just totally embraced Thin Lizzy at that point. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And he was touring with the Thin Lizzy band that was almost going to tour Australia, but it got pulled. It was a double bill with Cheap Trick. I was so disappointed. That was the closest that John Sykes ever got to these parts of the region. I don't know, you gents ever seen John Sykes live? No.
Yeah. By the
Seen
time I
Whitesnake,
saw,
but not with Sykes.
you say I saw the tour for the 1987 album, but of course by that time it was Adrian Vandenberg and Vivian Campbell on guitar.
Campbell,
So
Yeah. I'll be even so much bold and say this should have been a single. And it may have done better than the ones that they put out.
Yeah.
So
imagine if this had hooked into a movie on a
Yeah.
soundtrack. Yeah.
I could definitely see it as a soundtrack song.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, we're coming near the back end of the album. So Ptolemy, Tim.
Yeah. For this one, I always have to check because I always get it in my head that this song was also co-written by Tony Martin, but it wasn't. It just credited to Sykes alone. But this is very much, we're back in the Middle East. We're exploring the pyramids, or we're digging. We're looking for something. I like it. It's got that, it's got that Eastern thing. Yeah. I mean, it could, when Zeppelin are in the Kashmir thing, same as Valley of the Kings. And when I say Led Zeppelin in that's a very specific form of Led Zeppelin. But yes, this could totally have been, it could have been a Dio song, or it could have been a Dio Sabbath song. But I like it. Yeah. I think it's an interesting, you're right. I've never really thought about it before because I just like the album from the beginning, but it is kind of a schizophrenic album. And maybe that had something to do with, people didn't know what kind of band they were buying, but I like it. I still like it. But in this song, it's slow, it's heavy. It's got the Eastern thing. Yeah. It's interesting that he's got two of those long Eastern, epics on the same album, but it's really cool. I like the orchestration in it. It's great.
Yeah. Thanks. Reed.
All right. So Tony Martin says a lot of things, but among the many things he has said is that he co-wrote a lot of the Blue Murder album on which he is uncredited. And
makes sense.
I would bet money that he co-wrote Ptolemy because it is, again, 100% different than anything else on the album other than the song on which he does have co-writing credit.
Yeah.
And again, this is a Black Sabbath song. In fact, it's Zero the Hero, done with lyrics about ancient Egypt.
Yeah, it is Zero. You're right. It is with a much better production.
Yes, a much better production. You could slot this in on Born Again. You could slot it in on Eternal Idol or Headless Cross, and it would have been right in that 80s Black Sabbath territory. It's by far my favorite song on the album. Think the 1980s adventure films made a massive comeback thanks to Indiana Jones. Yeah. So you had Indiana Jones, you had King Solomon's Mines, you had, doggone it! All of a sudden, I'm forgetting the one.
Romancing the Stone.
That was exactly the one I was trying to think
of. Yeah.
So it's got an adventure tale. The guy's looking through the bazaar and he finds this old guy who tells him that there's treasure buried, and he goes after this treasure and horrible things happen to him. So it's got a great story. I love I don't even know that it qualifies as a chorus, but when they just sing Ptolemy, I love that part. I love the solo. He's shredding up a storm, and there's the one false note, and it's literally a false note in the song, is that the solo does not stop. And then the whole song modulates from a minor key to a major key when they go into, I wish I'd never listened to that old high priest, but he's still soloing in the old key. And just for a second, and I used to think that he actually resolved to the major key, but he doesn't. He's still playing when they do that modulation. But Peter, that's my favorite part on the album, is when it goes from the minor key soloing up to the major. And then they have that great massive vocal sound. It's the biggest vocal sound on the album. And I just love everything about it. And once again, I can absolutely picture Tony Iommi playing that riff because it's really similar to Zero the Hero. So you don't have to imagine it too hard. Yeah, I love this song. If he had done an entire album of songs like Valley of the Kings and Ptolemy, I'd have been all over that thing. I don't think it'd have been commercially successful because metal was getting away from that type of music in the late 80s. But still, I'd have bought it.
Well, 1989 was the year of ripping off Zero the Hero. There are a few other songs that were mining in that particular song. Steve, what do you think of this one?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're just talking about how the fact it's either Thin Lizzy or Whitesnake, and actually this is neither. Like Reed was saying, you could imagine it on some of those 80s Black Sabbath albums. Again, it's like the other song that is similar to Black Sabbath. It's quite long, and I think it sort of maybe is just a little bit too long. Like it's sort of at the end, it's sort of like it goes on and on and on quite a bit. So yeah, maybe I'm just running out of patience a little bit there. But yeah, it's quite a long song. I'm not quite sure the Ptolemy. I'm not quite. I was always wondering, well, what is a Ptolemy or what? And so I had to Google it, and I think it's like some astronomer, some well-known astronomer or mathematician or something like that. But I'm not quite sure how that even. Then when you read the lyrics, it's like I'm not sure how those two things actually go together. But so it's a weird song title.
I found what it is, but
yeah.
Well, apparently the story is that Phil Lynott was very much into history. It was very well read, and the lyrics were quite inspired by Phil Lynott because that was in his wheelhouse of topics. So that slightly contradicts what Reed says, but I'm sure I can understand where you're going with that one, Reed. It's very Black Sabbath-y sounding. Look, I think it's a fine second last track on an album. Yeah, it's one of the strongest songs on the album for sure. So we finish with the finale, Black-Hearted Woman. So what do you think of this one, Tim?
So real quick, the first thing that comes up under Ptolemy, he was a Greek mathematician, but I think what this song is about is Ptolemy, I'm assuming that's the first, it's like an I, Soter, 303 to 282 BC, Hellenistic ruler of Egypt, who established the Ptolemaic dynasty. That's got to be the Ptolemy in question here. And I love it how it fades out with the flanged vocals. Oh, like it's awesome. Now, Black-Hearted Woman, this one's interesting because I never really thought about the dichotomy in all the lyrics and the main sources that he draws from. I think that this last song, lyrically and musically, is a combination of the three. Well, musically, it's a lot like Whitesnake. It's a fast, it's like Children of the Night or Bad Boys. It's got how he winds his guitar riffs up. It's got that going for it. But lyrically, Tonight I'm Going to Make You Push It, and that's the score. That's kind of out of David Coverdale's lyric book. But it could be a Dio or like a Black Sabbath era Dio song, like Lady Evil or Starstruck by Rainbow. So it's got that going for it. And but it's also got a little Thin Lizzy in the lyrics, So it's interesting that the last song I'm sure it was all subconscious, but kind of reconciles, those different influences. And I think Peter's absolutely right. If Lizzy had continued after Thunder and Lightning, I think Sykes would have stuck with Phil. Even if Phil did more solo albums, I don't think he wanted to. I don't think he wanted to join any other band, never mind Whitesnake. But I think this is a nice, fast one to close the album because a lot of this album is kind of slow and plodding. If you didn't get into it first thing, it might be a tough sell. But this is just a hard rocking, up tempo song. Fades out, just on that black-hearted woman. Like it just ends a good album for me. But yeah, lyrically, I think it combines all of his, mentors or co-writers or whatever you want to call it. But I don't think it would have worked as well as a side opener. I think it really works well as an album closer.
Yeah, no, well said. Reed.
Yeah, as Tim was saying that, I can actually go through the lyrics of Tarot Woman to nearly that exact same line. So sure. It's an uncommonly good closer. Too many bands hang the worst song on the album as the last song. Like, no one will know it's there. No one even listens that far, as opposed to simply writing a better song. which I know is easier said than done. But it's good when an album leaves you with a good impression, and a fast, upbeat song, you know, gives you a little shot of energy on the way out. Ptolemy, as much as I love it, is a slow and plodding. It's a Sabbatharian track, and I love it because of that. But you wouldn't want to leave the album on that because it's a downer, right? It restricts you, whereas Black Magic Woman pushes you forward a little bit. It's got some dynamicism in it. Dynamism,
I think.
The English language, it does fail me.
It's like thank you, good night. You know, not
yeah.
Like,
we wish you well.
We wish you well. Aha. See what
it's
you did
a little more energetic than that, but yeah, I like it. I mean, it's not the best song on the album, but I'm so glad that it's not the worst song on the album, because again, it leaves you with a good impression on the way out the door. I wish more albums did that.
Steve.
Yeah, well, it's actually my favorite track off the album. So
Thank God for that.
Yeah, it for me, it probably, you know, look, I've grown to appreciate this album more over time, but I think at the time when I got the album, I thought, okay, this has saved the album for me. This is what I'm looking for. To mention Children of the Night, that's totally what it reminds me of. You know, just the riff is amazing. It's fantastic. Really killer riff. Yeah, I just really love this song. It is, so we're back in that sort of Whitesnake kind of world, but a sort of a heavy Whitesnake. And yeah, I did think at the time, well, they're ending the album with this song. Maybe some of these other songs are better than what I'm first thinking about, because if they think this is just sort of a song for at the end, those other songs must be better. I just need to give them more time, which is kind of true. But at the same time too, I think just for me, it's track 1 on side 1, it's track 1 on side 2, and it's this last track on side 2. Those 3 songs are my 3 favorite. This last song, Black Hearted Woman, it's easily my favorite song on the album. So yeah, okay. I love it.
Yeah. Well, sequencing is very important. It's always the first, the last on side 1, and the first and the last on side 2. And especially if you've got to have a good closer song, because that's the last impression people will have. But I guess when it's on the CD age changed everything. This album was probably, you probably correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, probably right at the tail end of the vinyl age.
In North America, yeah, they stopped making. The last domestic albums that I have on vinyl are from '90.
Yeah, so this would be right.
Yeah, you certainly didn't see a lot. You certainly didn't see a lot of vinyl in stores at this point. It was all cassettes and CDs.
Yeah, I've actually looked out for. I go to record fairs like yourself, Tim, and I've looked out for Blue Murder. I've never seen vinyl in the wild. Yeah.
I've seen it once, and it's the one time that I bought it. Now, I don't see it much.
Was it for a pretty penny? Bit expensive?
No,
okay.
It wasn't. So obviously somebody didn't realize what they had gotten rid of. And again, it's that promotional copy. So maybe a radio station or maybe a record store that had gone out of business was just unloading stuff. So I don't know. I'm just glad I found it.
No, good find.
Surprise.
I'm getting back to this song, Black Hearted Woman. I'll just say, are you ready to rock?
Yeah,
it's got that riff. It's just, to me, it's rock will recycle. It's a recycled riff, and it's a nice little humdinger of a rocker at the end, but it is very much Whitesnake, and it's just recycling it.
I got a really funny story to share with you guys about the time that I did see Whitesnake in concert. My wife and I went. It's almost been 5 years now. It was Jason Bonham's Led Zeppelin experience that opened. They were great. Then it was Whitesnake, played about an hour, and then it was Foreigner. But Whitesnake opened with Bad Boys. And, we'd made a playlist on the way down, and Sarah knew, the big Whitesnake songs, and I played her a few others, but Bad Boys wasn't one of the songs that I'd played. And I mean, I sing along. I can't sing that well, but I sing along at concerts. You know what I mean? I'm just into it. And, Coverdale comes out, is a song for ya? And I don't know if it was Reb or Joel Hoekstra, but one of them started up that riff. And of course, what do? I lean back and I do, ow, 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 like that, the howl. And I thought Sarah was going to die laughing. And I'm like, no, it's in the song. Anyway, that's just to talk about a slice of life. But
We've all been there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the album, gents. I think we can come to the conclusion that stylistically it is quite schizophrenic.
Yeah.
It's sort of everywhere. So
It's a tougher sell than I initially would have thought. I
Yeah.
just thought, why didn't people just get this? But I don't think it got to enough people for, a lot of the reasons we've discussed.
Right. So I have an unpopular theory about John Sykes. So I'm going to throw this out so that more people on YouTube can hate my opinions.
Nice.
I think John Sykes is a one-trick pony. John Sykes is a phenomenal guitar player in exactly one style. He sounds like John Sykes on every freaking thing he does. Tim has already imitated John Sykes multiple times because just like Zakk Wylde gets so much heat for for pinch harmonics.
Pitch harmonics, yeah.
Every lick that John Sykes does starts with "Ba-doo."
Boom. Yeah.
it's a trademark.
John
You should
Sykes
copyright it. Mm.
So I have some of John Sykes' solo album. I was looking up the title on it because I forget, but Nuclear Cowboy from 2000. I'm not going to swear that every track starts with that exact thing, but in my mind, as I listen to that, what I remember from that album, every song has that stupid boom because it's what
Less
he
is
did.
more.
When Sykes, and nobody remembers 16 note a second solos. You can't. It's too fast. All you hear is notes, right? It's impressive while you're listening to it, but it does not stick in your mind. What sticks in your mind are slower melodic passages, which is why most really flashy soloists, and Vivian Campbell and John Sykes had quite a rivalry going. Maybe John Sykes didn't acknowledge it, but Vivian Campbell talked about it incessantly because Sykes beat him out of the Thin Lizzy gig, right? Used to call him John Sucks. If you've never heard that story.
It seems to me that would have been a no-brainer, putting an Irish guy in an Irish band.
Yeah.
I've learned something today.
What makes the 80s solo shredders really stand out are those slow melodic passages mixed in with those really wheedly fast passages. And on almost every album Sykes plays guitar on, he's so over the top. He's showing off so much. And on Blue Murder, again, there are 6, 7, 8, 9 guitar parts. He's got riffs, he's got squeals, he's got accents, he's got arpeggios, all going at the same time. There's so much freaking stuff happening. It's really hard to hang your ear on something, right? And what is John Sykes most famous for in the guitar playing community? I'll answer you. It's his vibrato. Yeah. It's that really wide vibrato that he has. Well, he can't deploy that weapon when he's playing a million
fast.
Miles an hour.
Yeah.
So when he does his slower melodic passages, he's fantastic. He needs an editor.
Yeah.
And that's what he had in Whitesnake, was an editor to tell him, you're overplaying, you need to dial this back.
Must have killed him to play that solo from Is This Love, because that's a very slow solo, but it's a good showcase for that vibrato. It's great.
He's capable. Look, Reed, he is capable of doing the slower vibrato, having that slow tone. But I agree. Yes. This album, as I said at the start of the show, is very busy. It's over caffeinated. And that's something prevalent to the 2023 ears.
Yeah. And people that tried to, maybe they listened to the album in a store or something, or a friend had it, and instead of buying another copy, they probably just thought, well, I'm not sure exactly what I'm listening to. It needed a little dialing back.
I'll put it even more contrarian. Trying too hard.
Yeah.
He wanted
success. A lot of pressure.
He wanted success so much. I think everybody on this project was just trying too hard. And when you try it too hard, it becomes less organic and it becomes more corporate. And you've got other people coming in. So instead of whenever you've got a core people in the band making decisions, and I'm talking about the three, when you've got 5 people and 6 people and 7 people, and it comes to 20 people making decisions, that's when the project gets messy and artistic decisions may maybe not be made in the right way.
Right. And as we've seen, Sykes is now literally incapable of completing a project.
Yeah.
You know, he was the original guitar player in the Winery Dogs.
Winery Dogs, yeah.
And they ditched him for Richie Kotzen, or he left, one or the other. I don't know which way that went.
Or he never showed up. He's
Right.
almost like not as bad, but he's almost like a Vinnie Vincent. Like
he's talked about having a solo album done now for years.
Yeah.
And he released a couple of songs, but no album.
I think he's psychologically damaged after this album. I think he put all his eggs in the basket, and because it failed, and it didn't do well, because it went UK number 45, and I looked at the chart history, it literally disappeared the week after.
Yeah.
Hit number 69, and the conjecture is, I think it's only done, 300 to 400,000 copies.
And that's worldwide.
Which would have been a decent amount for a brand new band, a bunch of young guys coming out. But Geffen Records, and Geffen is like the most corporate of corporate labels, I think.
Yeah.
For that stuff, but the big bucks and throwing money at things, but just as easily turning their back for the next thing that comes along, which sooner or later, oddly enough, Geffen brought Nirvana into the world, but that's a whole other story. But for Blue Murder, they were all poised for success. And when it didn't happen, I don't think he knew what to do. He was not expecting that. And he wanted to stick it to Coverdale so badly. Never mind the lyrics. He wanted to succeed because let's remember, this album came out quite a few months before Slip of the Tongue on the same label. And that's always a weird situation when you've got these two competing factions. It's like when Lou Gramm went solo and he was still on Atlantic, like Foreigner was. Like, no way are Atlantic going to put more money into one guy than an established brand. And I think that might have been part of what happened with this.
And one of the conspiracy theories that John Sykes was putting out, he said that Geffen wanted this project to fail so they could force Coverdale and Sykes back together, which was never going to happen.
What might have happened if another label had signed him, if Columbia had signed him, or Warner Brothers, or
Atlantic,
something like that.
Warner's,
a band,
another offshoot,
Elektra, and a label that knew what to do with this type of music. Geffen knew what to do with this type of music, but there'd be so many of the same personnel behind the scenes, both expected to work this album and promote it. So.
All right, so you got Colander. And you've got DC in one ear and Sykes in the other ear. Who's he going to listen to?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, Sykes was the guitar playing end of those 8 million sold. Coverdale's the voice and the face. So
I'll put another thing out to you, lads, in regards to why this album didn't succeed. It needs a front man.
People weren't used to seeing a front man. Yeah.
It needs a front man. John Sykes, and I know you guys say excellent voice. To me, he's got a good voice, but he is not in the league of a David Coverdale, all those top rung heavy metal vocalists. And you need somebody with the personality who is a good front man and can project themselves to the audience.
I think that's the thing. Less than his voice, it's his personality. He does not have the charisma. David, one of the things about David's smutty lyrics is he gives it with a little wink and a nudge.
Oh, yeah.
And it doesn't seem as slutty, right?
Yeah. And when I saw him 5 years ago, his voice was a mere shell of what it used to be. But he's got the mic stand. He's working the crowd. He's David frickin' Coverdale. He's a rock star.
He's working.
And I don't think Sykes ever had that.
No,
David Coverdale, he wants to be the front man, but I think John Sykes is kind of like, well, I'll do it because I can't find anyone else good enough for it. You know what I mean? So he's kind of reluctantly doing it, I think.
I think the best choice for that band would have been Ray Gillen, but in retrospect, if you see what happened with the Ray Gillen story, that would have ended in tears as well.
There would have been
that's a very sad story.
It's a terrible story, and there'd have been no reissues.
100%.
Because of
Look
what
that up on
happened. And
YouTube, folks.
people can look it
on
up.
YouTube.
It's not. It's a tragic story. Yeah, you're absolutely. Yeah, you know what? You're right. I mean, if they'd had a singer that was at least as good as Sykes, similar in appearance, had the front man look out front, Sykes would have been a good co-lead vocalist. Like, I'm going to use another example here. This is a band that actually Blue Murder opened a few shows for. But I was a huge fan of Bon Jovi back then. Like, they were my gateway band into hard rock. And I've always thought Richie Sambora was a better singer than John. But John's the front man. You need the guy that can work the crowd, right? And Richie's a good second hand to come in on those vocal parts or sing the occasional lead vocal. Yeah, maybe if Blue Murder had that, even if they'd have delivered the album exactly as it was, but gone on tour with a front man out front, it might have made a difference. Or even if they'd have just had another guitar player, because I mean, Cinderella were huge back then, and Tom Kiefer played the lion's share of lead guitar and was the vocalist. But who knows?
Yeah. Like Finn Lizzy never made it big in America.
No,
because America grooves on frontmen, on front people. Finn Lizzy works well in that English style where it's more.
But Phil was much more. But Phil, even though he played an instrument, he was a lot more charismatic than Sykes ever was.
Absolutely. He had charisma in spades. Yeah. But America's very visual, and they are all about the front man, whether it's your David Lee Roths, your David Coverdales, et cetera. But
Finn Lizzy just had the one gold album and the one hit in the States, unfortunately.
Yep. And
the band, I'm still missing a lot of their catalog. I gotta get more into it, but I really like Thunder and Lightning. I know that's probably not a popular opinion, but maybe it's because I'm a Sykes fan of what he did later. But
yeah,
it's a good album.
But I know people like that album. I think it's quite highly regarded, Thunder and Lightning. Yeah,
I don't think it's a particularly Lizzy sounding album. No, it's pretty heavy, right?
Yeah, it's heavy. Yeah.
Makes me wonder what I always wonder about these bands that you think kind of end prematurely. What would the next album have sounded like?
Yeah.
Could have completely sucked. We don't know.
Yeah.
Before I forget, Steve, I got to ask, it's been bothering me. I've been trying to figure it out. The record that's, I guess it would be right behind your right shoulder in the bin, inside the bin.
Blue Murder.
Yeah. So I see the first Blue Murder album. I see Ace of Spades. Is that XYZ Hungry?
I do have it, but I don't know if that's what you can see.
I'm trying to figure out how to see Black and Blue in Heat. That one right there.
This is. Oh,
but I was trying to figure out what that was. I'm like, is it XYZ? Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm bad for that. I'm sitting there looking at what are those albums in the bins? That's cool that you got Nothing But Trouble on.
But I have got, I have got the which we're just talking about. How basically Geffen maybe didn't even want the album to work, and they wanted him to maybe get back with Whitesnake. But weirdly, they did release another Blue Murder album, and in 1993, maybe it was a contractual type of thing.
I think that it must have been. It took way too long. Do we want to talk about this briefly?
Yeah, let's go into the.
I've actually listened to this album quite a bit recently to prepare for this, because I've always kind of mentally thought, yeah, it's okay, but it's not as good as the first album. I actually think it's quite a good album. I don't like it as much as the first album. I think there are several more songs on here that could have been potential singles had this album come out in 1990 or 1991. In 1993, didn't have a prayer. It's very similarly produced to the first album, even though it's John Sykes producing. You still got Mike Fraser mixing it, which I bet you that has a lot to do with how it sounds. I think songs like Cry for Love, Save My Love, Shouldn't Have Let You Go, Dance, like there are songs on here that could have gotten radio play pre-grunge.
It's different backing musicians, right? It's no longer Tony Franklin and Carmen.
They're a little cagey about who actually plays on what. So they've got let me just open this up.
Tony Franklin and Carmen Apiece do play on like two of the songs.
Yeah.
But they've got
Marco Mendoza,
who went on Tommy Osteen, yeah. So it's these that's the band.
And I was really, really excited when this first came out, because I was a big fan of the band Baton Rouge, which is a little known band that put out 2 albums on Atlantic right at the beginning of the 90s. And their singer was this guy, Kelly Keeling, who oddly enough sounds a little bit like Coverdale. I thought he had a great bluesy voice, especially their first album, Shake Your Soul. I thought was, of all of the, there were too many albums coming out. There were way, way too many. And I think Atlantic put out the majority of them. But I thought that Baton Rouge were a band that had the songs that could have done better. I just think there were too many bands. Anyway, he sings on I'm on Fire, and I think you can hear him on Dance. But I think that there are some perfectly good songs in here. We All Fall Down could have been on the first album. And I think it's out of the Thin Lizzy songbook. It totally sounds like it could have been a Thin Lizzy song.
There's a music video for We All Fall Down as well, but it's real basic. It's just them basically in the studio just playing the song.
The album
died a quick death. I mean, it just came out and that was it. I got my copy through Columbia House Music Club, which I was excited to see they actually carried it. And that's probably the only reason, because I never ever saw it in the store. But yeah, a good album, a better album than probably time is given it credit for. It came out took too long to come out, which I think is a constant in Sykes' career. He overthinks, he overdoes. If this had come out in 90 or 91, might have had a shot. I'm not familiar with the original version of Itchy Coo Park. I don't think it fits on here at all. I don't know why they put it on here. Like, I can't see it ever have being a hit. I don't think it fits on here. I'm a little confused by its inclusion, especially as the second track. Other than that, I really don't have a problem with anything on here.
Yeah. Steve, what do you think of this album?
I think Cry for Love, we're talking about sort of slower songs, ballad songs that could have been hit. That could have been a massive hit, that song. That is a much better Blue Murder ballad than the track they've got. Yeah, Out of Love. Yeah. Much better.
Yeah, if you could flip-flop, go back in time and say, no, switch that song for that song. Now you've got something. And I think if you'd have stuck Shouldn't Have Let You Go on that first album, you might have had a radio hit.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I prefer the debut, but I didn't even know about this until, I don't know, 10 years after. Whatever. Lucky to find a Korean pressing on awesome. eBay like 10 years ago, 12 years ago. So yeah, and then
real quick,
there's a live album. Yeah.
I just wanted to talk about this. I just picked this up. It's called Screaming Blue Murder, dedicated to Phil Lynott. This is the track listing: Riot, Cry for Love, Cold Sweat, Billy, Save My Love, Jelly Roll, We All Fall Down, Please Don't Leave Me, Still of the Night, and Dancing in the Moonlight. This was recorded live in Japan, December 93. This is really good. This is really, really good from the Nothing But Trouble tour.
And I've seen John Sykes do a few YouTube clips in concert around that era, and he's on fire. So
And Marco Mendoza does a fine job on the fretless bass.
Absolutely. Gents, I'm going to wrap this up. This was a really great show. We've done a real deep dive into Blue Murder. There are a lot of fans out there that love John Sykes, and I think it's just a crying shame that he hasn't really put out much material for a long time. I hope he will come out, like Jake E. Lee did come out eventually. I hope that John Sykes puts out some material, because he's got many fans. Reed Little, thank you very much. Tim Durling, thank you very much. And Steve Deluxe. Please check out their channels. Tim's Vinyl Confessions, there's the bookmark. Steve from Rock and Metal Invasion. You can see Reed Little on the Contrarians. And please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Plenty more content coming soon. See you later. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Keep it rock.
Everybody.